ila+golden and welcome to my blog. Today I've decided that I want to talk about my influences and inspirations. Or inspirations and influences. I don't know what the best way around of saying that is. The reason I want to do it sort of as my second vlog before most people who will come across this won't necessarily know my work, so it's an odd one to sort of do before introducing people to my work a little bit, but at the same time I think what influences us and inspires us as writers and as creative people probably says just as much about our work as our work says about us. So getting this one done sooner rather than later with the idea that I might redo one similar to this sometime down the line, because as with all creative people, what has inspired me and what influenced me has altered quite a bit throughout my lifetime. I mean, obviously certain things are always there and certain things come and go, but what influences me now as a creative person isn't necessarily what was influencing me 5-10 years ago as a creative person, or longer still. So who's to say what I'm going to be inspired by in 5-10 years from now? To sort of say that this is the only time I'm ever going to talk about these sort of things is not how I want to frame this. This is sort of where I've been creatively, what's inspired me in the past and what's influenced certain works. And I do have a backlog of works which I'm hoping will all eventually get published, and knowing some of the inspiration behind where I've been creatively might help people decide whether or not I'm the kind of writer that they want to get into. Okay, we can go with this. So I think I want to start off a little bit, going quite a bit back to sort of when I was young. So as I mentioned in my first vlog, I was very, very young, 5 or 6-ish, when I first started telling stories. And okay, yes, you don't remember all the things that inspire you as a creative person when you are 5, but certain things I think always sort of stuck with me. I mean, I definitely remember that I was that kid on the playground who used to make up the games that the other kids wanted to play, at least at the first school that I went to. And I know they were weird. They were weird. I had a creative imagination even then, which is probably why, as I got older, I found it difficult to sort of pinpoint exactly where my ideas were coming from and exactly what was inspiring me. But I think looking back, a lot of it was probably the types of TV shows that I was exposed to as a child. A lot of the sort of magical realism type things, a lot of the toys coming to life type things. So certainly if you look back on little baby me, I would definitely say I could pinpoint a lot of my influences coming from the types of shows that I was watching, or the types of books that were being read to me, or that I would eventually go on to read. I do eventually go on to read things. But I'd say, thinking of it that way and looking back as I have been in preparation for this, I've realised that I've probably been more inspired by things visually than I have been by things that I've read. So I've been more inspired by TV shows and movies and anime and cartoons and stuff like that than necessarily the things that I've read. It's not to say that reading hasn't done anything for me at all. Don't by any means think that. Reading has done a lot for me, and a lot of my style, a lot of the way that I approach writing has been influenced by, you know, the things that I read. But I would say that in terms of a lot of the things that inspire me and a lot of the things which influence the subject matters that I write and the type of characters that I write have probably all come from visual mediums. That's the word I was looking for just now. So, as I say, going back to when I was very little, it was very much this sort of, you know, the toys coming to life type things. And the reasons I probably remember that so much is I don't think I ever completely left the magical realism and, you know, that sort of thing behind. If the children's books behind me or anything to go by, you probably can't see them on the shelf directly behind me, although there are definitely children's books on that shelf. That I look at it. It's weird. I don't write for children. I do tend to aim at young adults and teenagers, very much for my writing. So again, a lot of the things that I will be talking about when I actually start mentioning stuff, and I will start doing that soon, will be sort of aimed much more at that sort of target demographic or audience or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, we've covered the early stuff, I think, is about as good as we can. So I am going to sort of like say that the first time I became aware of something influencing how I approach a story would be in my teens. And it was Pokemon. Not gonna lie, it was Pokemon. It was the anime. Well, kind of the anime, kind of the games. Not necessarily for the reasons you might be thinking. As somebody, I very predominantly write fantasy, not exclusively write fantasy, but I very predominantly write fantasy. Fantasy which tends to sort of have other genre influences within it. I'm very sort of keen on the idea of merging genres a little bit and not having this sort of, well, this is just fantasy and it can't be anything else, and this is just sci-fi and it can't be anything else. I don't like the restrictions of that, because I think stories are more interesting when they incorporate different elements from different genres anyway. We're getting slightly off track here. The first time I became aware of something definitely having an influence on my creativity and my story ideas was Pokemon. And it was purely the type system. I mean, obviously, I'd seen things before where, you know, you have somebody who could just use fire or whatever. But there was something about the way that Pokemon kind of presented the idea that, and presented the idea, I will get words in a second, give me a second. There was something about the way Pokemon presented the idea that just struck a chord with me. And I think it was because you were presented with so much of it, and it was such an active part of the world, and it wasn't presented as special necessarily. It wasn't presented like, you know, and a lot of the sort of fantasy sort of type films that were around as I was growing up, the idea that if you could do something quote unquote magical, it was special, it was important, it was, you know, it elevated you to a different status, it, you know, separated you from other people. But there's something just about the way that Pokemon kind of presented the idea which just normalized it. It normalized everything about it. And I don't know if other people would necessarily get that, but I think it was the first time I came across a show where it wasn't just a magical element being treated as something normal, it was a magical element that was normal. Maybe that means I led a slightly sheltered existence growing up, not having been exposed to anything else before then, or maybe not. You can be the judge of that, but I very distinctly remember this sort of idea, and I definitely had a lot of my early dabblings with what would would go on to be called elemental magic within my multiverse, and we will get over my multiverse at some point. Maybe not in this video, but at some point. But what would eventually go on to be called the elementals, elemental magic, and the 10 orders of power, and stuff like that was very, very much influenced by the way it was presented in Pokemon. Obviously, I took that idea and went my direction with it. You do have to do that as a director. You can't just, you know. But yeah, that was the first time I remember ever being definitely and specifically inspired by something and influenced by something, just in terms of how I then went on to think about it. And yeah, there are probably more words there, but my brain won't let me access them right now. So, and that would have probably been sort of my early to mid-teens, and you know, I'm not gonna lie, I still like Pokemon. I don't watch the anime anymore, but I do still play the games. So this is kind of, as you can see, what I mean by, yes, I'm not necessarily 100% inspired by all the things and influenced by all the things that, you know, I was as a child, but it doesn't mean that they don't still inform and influence me as a person now, and they might in the future at some point again influence me. I can word so good. So yeah, that was definitely the first time, and I think the only other thing I can sort of definitely say about my teens that definitely stuck with me as an idea was the Arnold Schwarzenegger film Junior. Anybody who's ever read the Tale Saga, which is the saga name of the fanfic series that I mentioned in the last video, anybody who's read that will know what I mean when I say that that's definitely was a slight influence there. And again, similarly speaking, season 1 of Enterprise, yes, I did watch a lot of that Star Trek series. I know a lot of people have mixed feelings about it. I just enjoyed the characters, I enjoyed the show. Be that as it may, it was what it was to me. And yeah, again, there was a season, I think it's season, there was an episode that I believe is season 1, where a certain male character does end up pregnant, and yeah, definitely would say that's influenced some of my writing. As I said, anybody that's read the Tale Saga will definitely know what I'm talking about there. Anyway, sort of going to university, you start being exposed to a lot more. You know, things you don't necessarily think about, things you do think about, you definitely find yourself creatively in university, or at least you think you do. I mean, university is definitely where I started finding my footing creatively, and started writing on a daily basis. when I was at university was a chapter of every project that I was working on. And I think at the most I was ever working on was like 3. And I think that's very much when anime and manga started to very heavily influence my work. So things like Yu-Gi-Oh, anime films like, you know, Spirited Away and Kiki's Delivery Service, things like that, where you're exposed to a different way of contextualizing magic into a story. I mean, it's not completely different, obviously, but as I said, visual mediums have always had much more of an influence than written mediums on me, definitely. I will talk about written mediums sort of separately, I think, a little bit later on, because there are a couple of points I probably should have brought up before now. My brain doesn't work particularly well. It's not the most logical of things. I probably should have come into this with a bit more of a plan. Anyway, so yeah, I would definitely say university is when things like anime, both the shows and the films, started entering my consciousness a lot more. I started watching a lot more things that were recommended to me by friends that I wouldn't necessarily have seen otherwise. And that did have a big impact on how I visualize storytelling and how I've gone about storytelling. And likewise, mangas and stuff that I've read have had a huge influence as well. And I know it has, because I've been told by certain people who've read my work that there is a manga-ish feel, even though it's not, you know, there's no images or anything like that. I've been told that I have a manga-ish feel or manga-ish style. I don't know exactly what that means. Obviously it means something to the people who told me that, but it's not necessarily something that, you know, everybody would necessarily pick up on or say. So yeah, I definitely would say that's had an impact, and I think it still does have an impact, because I still watch a lot of anime. I don't read quite as much manga. I do still read manga, but I don't read quite as much manga. Don't know why. I think I just like watching things. So yeah, the fantasy sort of part of my writing, part of my work, yeah, it is all that sort of magical stuff and all that has had the big impact, and the anime stuff and the manga stuff has had a big impact on how I formulate characters and how I shape characters, definitely. And this is all going to be very, very all over the place, because what I should have mentioned before and haven't mentioned now, and have to mention now, I can nail language today. Absolutely nailing language today. There are going to be so many jump cuts in this. Yeah, so one of the things that I would say has definitely influenced the blending, the genre blending that I mentioned earlier, is all the point horrors that I read as a teenager. This is what I'm in. And the reason I would say that is my writing has always had a slightly dark edge to it. I don't know if it was there when I was really little, but given the fact that one of the major influences for a lot of the stuff that I was sort of pseudo-writing as a preteen and early teen was based on a nightmare that I had. Which I woke up from and was kind of like, oh, that was a good dream, even though most people would have considered it a nightmare. Yeah, there's definitely a dark influence to my work. There's definitely a dark edge to my work, and I like the fact that it's there. And I've always encouraged my brain to sort of seek out ways of putting a darkness into something without it necessarily having to be horror, without it necessarily having to terrify people. That's not the end game at all. Just to sort of, at most, maybe creep people out, or at most sort of present the fact that what's going on isn't necessarily as clean cut as it could be. That maybe there's something darker there, or maybe it's just being looked at in the wrong way. And love them or hate them, for me, point horrors are that. They are that way of presenting something that is dark, but dark light. Less dark. And presenting these ideas and these themes in a way that very much is, and it is probably the key type of storytelling, the key type of books which have had the most impact. You know, that's the written words that have had the most impact on my written words. I word good. Yeah. Yeah. So I would definitely say point horrors are the thing that have had the biggest impact on how I incorporate darkness into my work, and the biggest impact on not necessarily the style I write in, but the nature in which I write my fantasy stories. I mean, even like the fantasy stories I go in trying to make them all light and bubbly, end up at the dark edge somehow, and I totally blame point horrors for that. I know I'm not presenting myself particularly well right now, and I think the reason I find it difficult talking about what inspires me and what influences me is you don't necessarily know what influences you as you're writing something. I mean, sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's something you only pick up on in hindsight. Whereas when something has inspired you or has made you think about an idea in a completely different way, you can pinpoint that, you know that's what it is, and you know that's what it's done. But by the time you've sort of finished with it, it becomes something else, and although you organically know how it's reached that point, maybe in your own head, at the same time, you try to explain it to somebody else, they can't necessarily follow that same train of thoughts. So yes, this has been very rambly, and I think I'm going to cut it here now. See if I've got anything salvageable out of this. That'd be good. Probably going to be a lot of jump cuts, because I had a lot of difficulty with words this one. Anyway, unlike the last time, I know what the next vlog is going to be about. The next vlog is going to be about my most recent published title, Echo. The reason I'm doing it for the next one is because I decided it could be the first one. You need to introduce who I was first. And I didn't want it to be the second one, because I didn't want to sort of go in with, yeah, I'm just gonna shove things that I want you to buy in your face. I don't want to come across like that anyway. That's not the idea behind doing the next vlog on Echo. I'm doing the next vlog on Echo because I want to talk about Echo, both the book and the character, because I think it will follow on nicely from this one anyway, talking about influences and inspiration and how I sort of formulate stories from those things. You'll understand that more, I hope, in the next one. She says. So yes, the next vlog will be about Echo. I'm looking forward to it, based on how well this went. So yeah, take care everyone, and see ya.